186,000. That's a number I really want you to think on as we look at new correspondence that's come out from the medical journal The Lancet titled Counting the Dead in Gaza, Difficult but Essential. This is really groundbreaking correspondence that I think is really worth digging into, so I want to jump right in. As they note, by June 19th, 2024, 37,396 people had been killed in the Gaza Strip since the attack by Hamas and the subsequent Israeli invasion in October 2023. That number is according to the Gaza Health Ministry, and it's unfortunately a number that for months many people have really openly stated is a likely undercount, a number that doesn't actually adequately demonstrate the scale of destruction and death being wrought by Israeli occupational forces from within the concentration camp that is Gaza. Now, there's reasons for that undercount, right? As the Lancet points out, collecting data is becoming increasingly difficult for the Gaza Health Ministry due to the destruction of much of its infrastructure at the hands of Israeli occupational forces in the midst of their invasion and their genocidal military campaign. The destruction of hospitals, of clinics, of these medical facilities that traditionally have aided the ministry in their death counts, their counting of injuries, have been systematically destroyed as Israelis try to make life unbearable for Palestinians within Gaza. As the Lancet points out, this change has really degraded the detailed data recorded previously, and we don't know the full scale of what is going on as a result of that. We've known that this is an undercount, but we haven't really known what scale that undercount is. We don't know if it's a few thousand too little or tens of thousands too little, although I think most people agree at this point that it is at the very least tens of thousands lower than the actual count itself. Now, I want to dive into a little bit of a side tangent that's really critical within the Lancet's reporting before we get to the number 186,000, which at this point you're probably already aware of what that number is going to be representing. As the Lancet points out, armed conflicts have indirect health implications beyond the direct harm from violence. Even if the conflict ends immediately, like the genocide that's ongoing in Gaza, there will continue to be many indirect deaths in the coming months and years from causes such as reproductive, communicable, and non-communicable diseases. The total death toll in Gaza is expected to be large given the intensity of the ongoing genocidal operations undergone by the Israeli military, as well as the destroyed healthcare infrastructure, severe shortages of food, water, and shelter, and the population's inability to flee to safe spaces, as well as the loss of funding to UNRWA that have all been associated with this genocide. In recent conflicts, the Lancet points out that indirect deaths range from 3 to 15 times the number of direct deaths. What that means is that for every one person that is killed by direct violence, you can multiply that number by 3 to 15 to get a somewhat accurate estimation of the actual scale of death that is going to occur as a result of a conflict, of a genocide, or what have you. Now, the Lancet applies a really conservative estimation of 4 indirect deaths per 1 direct death in the case of Gaza. They apply that to the number 37,396, the amount of deaths that are officially reported. And they state that it's not implausible to estimate that upwards of 186,000 or even more Palestinians could be killed, could die as a result of the current genocide in Gaza. Now, when you use the 2022 Gaza Strip population estimate of 2,375,259, that would translate to 7 to 9% of the total population of the Gaza Strip. That's a number, a figure that I think is genuinely difficult, if not impossible, for many of us to comprehend. I know myself, I struggle to deal with the scale of that number. I think for me, what really puts it into perspective is that I grew up in southern Indiana, right? I grew up in a city known as Evansville. I grew up a little bit outside of it, but I'm going to use this as the example. Evansville has about 115,000 people in the entire city. I can't imagine the entire city I grew up in everyone in it, being systematically obliterated in just the span of a couple of months. But Palestinians in Gaza are living with that reality, right? As we look at figures like this, we have to understand those numbers, and we have to also understand how those numbers connect to the broader history. Because not only are these numbers horrific. Not only are these massive numbers genuinely difficult to wrestle with, they're also numbers that aren't isolated, nor is this accidental, right? The Israeli military, Israeli government, and Israeli settlers largely have, for decades, been waging campaigns of systematic genocide, ethnic cleansing, displacement, subjugation, and exploitation of Palestinians. This predates even the official founding date of the Zionist colony in 1948. Zionist settler colonialism in historic Palestine really takes root, really starts its initial steps into the territories, into the land itself in about the 1880s, right? Like 1886 to 1888 is where you start to see this first colony established. By 1929, about a fifth of Palestinians or landless are displaced. That's a serious, serious number, right? And that's due to Zionist colonization, Zionist land acquisition, the subsequent kicking off of Palestinians from the land that so many, particularly Palestinian peasants, had cultivated for sometimes upwards of generations, right? Decades upon decades of family members and community members working this land ejected due to the territorial ambitions of Zionist settlers. Now, Palestinians, to their end, have resisted this colonization. We see that in things like the 1936 to 1939 Great Palestinian Revolt, a revolt that was brutally put down by the British and Zionists. But with that resistance, we also see increasing violence that is really done with the singular purpose of the wholesale annihilation of Palestinians in all forms but nostalgia. Just from 1947 to 1949, we see the mass ethnic cleansing of 750 to 800,000 Palestinians from upwards of 530 cities, towns, and villages in what Palestinians describe as the Nakba. Now, that's really only taking into account those couple of years. Realistically, you could actually say that the Nakba probably started in 1936 and is still ongoing, right? Because the ethnic cleansing campaigns, the campaigns of genocide, this displacement, this exploitation of Palestinian labor, this mass subjugation of Palestinians at scale in the 1948 and 1967 territories has not stopped and has been a consistent thread in Zionist settler colonialism since its very inception. You know, Palestinians in the West Bank are living in functional Bantustans, right, where movement is entirely dependent on the whims of Israeli military goals and security needs. In the West Bank is actually becoming increasingly colonized as the Israeli government allows for more and more settlers to enter the territory and consistently erodes what little power the PA itself, a sort of comforter government, actually has in the West Bank itself. East Jerusalem sees similar material conditions, right? In Gaza, we see, I think, a really brutal uniqueness to this ongoing occupation, where we see a total air, land, and sea blockade that has been undergone for over a decade and a half now. The systematic restructuring of Gaza from a, maybe an open-air prison to a functional concentration camp that is now being invaded, bombarded, and starved systematically. Palestinians in Gaza for decades have been dealing with the ramifications of Zionist settler colonialism and militarism, right? They have undergone period after period of these increased amounts of violence and hostility waged against them in a sort of genocidal goal to make life genuinely unbearable for Palestinians, to break their resolve, to get them to either die or leave a territory that Zionists really genuinely want for myriad reasons. That's because the Zionist settler colony is a settler colony. It is a sort of colonization in which a settler population enters a land, displaces and or eliminates the indigenous population on top of it, and then establishes a new, distinctly different society on the land in which they've stolen. Zionist colonial ambitions have always entailed the mass subjugation and death of Palestinians, because that's really the end goal of the colony itself, the elimination of Palestinians themselves and the replacement with a settler population atop the land. What we're seeing in Gaza is connected to that ongoing history. We are seeing tens of thousands of people, over 100,000, nearly 200,000 people estimated to die just from this ongoing genocide since October 7th. Right? A genocide that started well before October 7th is a part of a colonization effort that started decades ago. We're seeing more than 2 million Palestinians in the very same concentration camp. We're seeing these deaths occur. He's systematically starved out, repeatedly displaced, deprived of food, water, medical supplies, and more, not just by the Zionist military, but by settlers who are participating in the shutting off of access to aid trucks at critical border checkpoints. Checkpoints completely run by the Israeli military that willingly allows these settlers to continue what they're doing. This is the goal, right? Zionists are determined to either eliminate Palestinians or make life so unbearable for them that they either do not resist and accept subjugation or find a new place to be. Israelis for decades have been really hyperfixated on creating what they consider to be favorable ethnic compositions demographically on the ground, right? What Ben Gurion described initially as a 70-30 split between Zionist settlers and Palestinians that was later revised by many planners to about 60-40. Israelis understand that they have to continue eliminating and subjugating Palestinians in order for their project to actually be solvent in the first place. That's a real pickle, right, for Zionists as Palestinians continue to exist on the land. Zionists have to become increasingly violent to try to get them off of the land as their core goal. Gaza now is really the culmination of decades of violence, decades of militarism, and decades of outright fascism that we have seen perpetrated and perpetuated by Zionist settlers. And it's a reason why, when we're looking at what's going on in Palestine, the real solution, the real answer here is decolonization and end to Zionist settler colonialism, not just in Palestine, but also in Lebanon and Syria, where Zionists are also occupying land, whether it be the Sheba Farms in the Lebanese context or the Golan Heights in the Syrian context. We are seeing a colonial entity lash out violently in an effort to not only stabilize itself, but bring its goals to fruition. And the process of it bringing those goals to fruition is mass death and suffering for millions of people. That is not something that can coexist with the very indigenous peoples that it is trying to annihilate. And it's, again, a real reason why when we talk about, ceasefires and an end to the genocide, that has to be coupled with calls for decolonization and the liberation of every square inch of historic Palestine in the 1948 and 1967 territories. Zionist colonialism has always entailed mass violence against Palestinians, and it will always entail that because that is the core driver of Zionist colonial ambitions. But that violence can be overcome, and God willing, that violence will be. But yeah, that's just something to think on, I think. As always, free Palestine, salamu alaikum, and have a great day.